Okay, hi. This is like my millionth attempt at trying to make this video. So this video is for the couple people that have messaged me on Instagram asking about my experiences with paraneoplastic syndrome. I remember when I was first sick, I scoured the internet just trying to find people who had the same symptoms or had gone through the same experience as me, because it is really helpful when you get a diagnosis like this to connect with someone who's gone through similar things, just to kind of know what their experiences are and maybe figure out, like, oh, their doctor did this, maybe I can ask my doctor about it. So here goes. So first of all, the symptoms. So when I first got sick, this was before I was diagnosed, I woke up one day and my left leg was just wobbly. I don't know how else to describe it. I felt like it wasn't doing what I was telling it to do. And that lasted a couple days where I was kind of like dragging it. Eventually, my right leg started to feel the same way. At the time, I was exercising, like I was running and lifting weights, so I just figured that it was sort of a strain. But when I noticed it in both legs, and when it kind of felt like I was wobbling all the time, like I'd had a little bit too much to drink, I thought, okay, maybe something else is going on, maybe something neurological. So I made an appointment with my primary care doctor. And by the time that I had my appointment, it had gotten really bad to the point where it was affecting my hands, my motor skills. So I had gone, or I had had like a steak dinner with my family the night before, and I picked up my knife and was about to cut my meat, and my hand wouldn't stop shaking, and I just started bawling. And my mom knew what was going on. My whole family knew what was going on. They were constantly Googling, trying to figure out, like, why is Stephanie walking like a drunk person, and why are all these weird things happening? So she took my plate and started cutting my steak. And, anyways, when my doctor examined me and she watched me walk and she listened to me talk about my symptoms, she was worried. So, which actually made me feel better, because I didn't know, like, there was a part of me that wondered if it was all in my head, because it's so weird, like, that you could just wake up and walk like there's something wrong with you. I had no idea what was going on. So she said, come back Monday for an MRI. And this was my appointment was on a Friday. So, and she said, over the weekend, don't Google anything. Just try to like relax and try not to worry too much, because I mean, she was worried and she saw that I was worried. And um, honestly, like, she thought that it might be like MS or a brain tumor. And um, that's what a lot of Google results told me too. And she didn't want me to go down that path of worrying unnecessarily, which was smart. So I woke up that Monday, um, uh, which was the day of my MRI, the day I was supposed to go back to the doctor for an MRI. I got out of bed and I immediately fell to the floor. The room started spinning and I just started puking. So, like, I'm in really bad shape. I started screaming. My mom and dad came in. They saw me. My mom was like, "Okay," called an ambulance. Went to the ER. Got an MRI. So they conducted the MRI of my brain and my neck because they thought it was a neurological issue. So the doctor comes in and he says, "I have good news and bad news. Your brain is fine. They didn't find a tumor. They didn't find, is it legions? That's not the word. There's an L word, and there are things in your brain that doctors see them and they go, oh, that person has MS. So I didn't have MS and I didn't have a brain tumor. But he said, you have enlarged lymph nodes, so you have lymphoma. And I thought, well, that's weird. I if I have lymphoma, I mean, I was vaguely familiar with lymphoma because I had had a coworker whose boyfriend had it, and then I also knew someone from church whose brother had it, and I said neither of those people walked like they had had, you know, 4 gin martinis, so what the heck is going on? So um, they they biopsied one of my lymph nodes and they determined that it was the specific type. It was Hodgkin's lymphoma, you know, type B, classical. I don't know, there's all this medical jargon. But it was difficult for the oncologist to ascertain like why I was having these symptoms. So their first hypothesis was maybe something is pressing on a part of your brain that's making you act this way, which was true about my speech because I was slurring my words, and it was because I had something pressing on an artery. But the other stuff, I mean, I talked to a neurologist and he said, like, well, you know, your balance is your cerebellum, so there's nothing, your lymph nodes aren't pressing against your cerebellum. So eventually they did blood tests and spinal tap, and they said, we think you have this thing called paraneoplastic syndrome, and we're looking for different like antibodies in your blood and your spinal fluid that would determine that, that would help us diagnose that. Um, Unfortunately, they didn't find any of those antibodies. So um, what they told me was, well, we're diagnosing you with paraneoplastic syndrome, cerebellar degeneration, based on your symptoms because there are so many antibodies associated with this paraneoplastic syndrome, and we've identified some of them, but we haven't identified all of them. So just because you don't have any markers in your blood or your spinal fluid, it doesn't mean that you don't have it. And what else could it be? Because, you know, my brain scans were fine. Um, and I mean, it would be highly unusual that I would have cancer and like a totally separate issue. So it had to be something linked to my cancer. So they determined that it was this paraneoplastic syndrome. And actually, so that those were the local Spokane doctors. But even when I went months later to University of Pennsylvania, to the top neurologist that specializes in paraneoplastic syndrome in Philadelphia, he said the same thing. He said, like, you definitely have it because of your symptoms. And furthermore, he said that the treatment that I'd received here at home was spot on. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. So when you have paraneoplastic syndrome, because it's a side effect of cancer, the first thing that they want to do is treat the cancer because cancer can kill you. So I received ABVD chemo for 6 months every other week. Um, and then about a month or a month and a half of radiation after that, radiation treatments. So during the time that I was getting ABVD chemo, I received 4 or 6, gosh, this was a year and a half ago, but it feels like a lifetime ago. It was all blur, so sorry if the details were a little bit hazy. I got an infusion of a drug called rituximab, and I used to be able to tell you all about this drug, but I don't know if this is like a coping mechanism, but I've kind of blocked it all out. I don't remember that much about it, but um, basically it was to treat the paraneoplastic syndrome specifically. So the ABVD was to treat my cancer. This was to treat my um, paraneoplastic syndrome. So before getting it, the doctor said, like, you know, who knows, this could do nothing, or you could have one treatment and like get out of your wheelchair and, you know, be walking around. Because at this point, I mean, I was in really bad shape. I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't do normal things on my own, like um, shower or, I mean, just, it was bad. Okay, I needed help, like doing really personal stuff. So, and furthermore, they said, you know, maybe it'll just go away when your cancer gets better, or, you know, sometimes it doesn't go away, which Yeah, it's really scary when you're 24 years old and you're, otherwise, you've been pretty healthy and fit to say, you might not be able to like walk again or whatever. I was really scared going back to, me just fervently looking on Instagram and blogs, just trying to find one person who had gone through the same thing and one person who could say, like, I'm better now. That would be amazing. So, um, so after I received my first infusion of rituximab, I actually did notice some slight improvements right away. I remember specifically getting up out of my wheelchair and like taking a few steps down the hall. And my family was there, witnessed it, and they were bawling. And my dad started filming me. It was like I was a toddler taking my first steps. Um, and that made me really optimistic. I should have been cautiously optimistic, but I was like, oh yeah, after I get my final treatment of this, like by the time I'm done, I'm gonna be totally better. That's not really what happened though. By the time I got my fourth or my sixth treatment or whatever the final one was, I I had kind of just stabilized. So what I mean by that is prior to getting these infusions, it's like I would wake up and I would kind of feel like, oh, what new horrible symptom am I going to have today? Because, as I said earlier, it kind of happened like gradually and then all at once. It was kind of, left leg bugging me and then, oh, left leg, right leg, both hands, walking like you're belligerent, blah, 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 blah. But after I received rituximab, instead of getting up feeling a little bit worse every day, I kind of just stabilized, um, which was a huge help because I was able to start learning how to function a little bit better with this condition. So I had had physical therapy and occupation therapy, but it wasn't helpful for me initially because I just kept getting worse. So it's like I would make progress in physical therapy, but then I I kept getting worse because it was neurological. It wasn't like a weakness issue. So this at least allowed me to figure out like, okay, how can I move now with these balance issues? So what I did following the rituximab, that was in the middle of my chemo. So after chemo, because chemo totally just wiped me out. I was exhausted all the time. I was sick. Like I had to take tons of stuff to help me not be nauseous. I was on another dimension. But after chemo, I got radiation treatments, which they made me tired, but it wasn't as bad. And then I was able to start kind of gradually moving more. I transitioned from a wheelchair to a walker, and I actually set a goal for myself to walk, with my walker, 5 miles a day. So I kept my cell phone on me and I was listening to music or podcasts, and I would just walk around the house with my walker. And actually, it wasn't so much that I thought like, oh, this is therapy, like this will actually make me be able to walk. It was more just I just really needed to move. I had been in bed, for months and barely able to move. And it was when you lay in bed all day, like it's hard to sleep and it's hard to think and you get really depressed. So it was just for my own sort of mental well being. But then as I started, kind of like doing this, I started moving better. And eventually, after about 3 months or 2.5, something like that, of doing that, I transitioned to a cane. I ordered a cane on Amazon and I started using it. And then I started using my cane to walk around the house. And then eventually I stopped using my cane and I would just kind of like try to walk as much as I can without holding on to anything. And then like I knew the layout of my house really well. So then if I did start to lose my balance, I'd sort of like hold a wall or hold a sofa or something. And yeah, and then I stopped using a cane at home and I would just use it when I went out somewhere. and I stayed with my sister. She lives out in Las Vegas. I live up in Washington State, for a couple weeks in the middle of the summer. And she took me to like her gym every day, and I was using the bike and doing just some basic like strength exercises. And at this time, it's like it was really hard for me to walk. I, when, like, I wasn't, I didn't want people to be worried or feel sorry for me, so I wouldn't necessarily always express this, but every time I walked out in public, like if I'd be at the grocery store or like I said at the gym or going out to dinner or something, I was always I always felt like I was about to fall. And I was always about to fall. Um, I never fell though, so that was like, thank you, Lord. But it was scary and I felt vulnerable, and also like my legs kind of hurt because I wasn't walking correctly, like I was stiff. Um, so that was the summertime. So by the time September rolled around and I have had a year left of school of to get my bachelor's degree. So I enrolled in school and I felt comfortable. Nowadays, at least, in the US, it's like we have laws basically that make it so that businesses accommodate people who are disabled. So my school campus is really easy to get around. I could use the elevator. I took the bus and it would drop me off like right near the building where all my classes were. And yeah, it was a really ideal situation. Um, but then we had, so fall was good, but then we had kind of a bad winter and we had a lot of snow and ice. And I felt super vulnerable because my balance was kind of like 60% of where it was before. And it was really scary for me with the snow and ice because I just always felt like I was going to slip. And it was a legitimate fear. I mean, just even people I know who don't have any balance issues slipped. And like, I know a guy that totally messed up his ankle, and yeah, it just wasn't good. So I told my mom, like, I think I'm finally ready to do like real physical therapy because, like I said before, I didn't find physical therapy helpful at all in the beginning of my illness. It was super frustrating because I just kept getting worse, and I felt like a ticking time bomb until, eventually I couldn't move at all. So I sort of just got my treatments and then, like I said earlier, did kind of my own thing, my own program at home, which I don't even know if that was like the best thing to do, but like it was just felt so good to just finally move around, even if it was just with a walker down the hallways of my house. But I went to my primary care doctor and she referred me to a physical therapist, and it was great. It made a huge difference. For like about 6 weeks, I would go in twice a week and then I would do exercises every day at home. Um, a lot of it was focused on just balance and coordination, things like planking and doing things on one leg and kind of goofy stuff, but made a huge difference. Especially one thing that they really emphasized was strengthening my hips and my quads. Those had kind of just weakened um, during this whole process, and so it was so so by the time like I started physical therapy, I hadn't been walking well for over a year, and so a lot of the problems that I was having, like the weakness, were actually things that could be fixed. Um, because they had deteriorated based on the way that I was walking. I was walking weird because my balance was a little bit off, so I would like overcompensate by like locking my knees and just moving really stiffly. So they kind of just helped me to loosen my joints and strengthen certain areas so that it wasn't painful to walk. And anyways, that started in January, lasted till the middle of February, and ever since then I am a totally different person. Now, my coordination isn't where it was before. And honestly, like, I don't know if it ever will be, but I do feel like I get a little bit better every day. Um, I can't necessarily like see the day-to-day changes, but like if I think about where I was a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, like I'm doing a lot better as time goes on. And I don't I don't feel like I'm gonna fall all the time. I don't feel as scared and vulnerable. I don't always feel like people are staring at me. Once in a while, I'll do something kind of goofy. Like the other day, I was telling my friends a story, and then I started standing on one leg, just like I think I was like itching one of my calves with like the opposite foot, and then I started losing my balance. Like that's totally something I could have done before, but now I can't, and I don't always think about that, which I think is a good sign because before when I was super sick, I was so aware of my limitations and it actually made me worse because I would be stiff and um yeah, so now I would say I'm like 85 or 90% to where I was before. I have no trouble doing day-to-day things. I have no trouble like, taking a walk around my neighborhood, taking a shower. Sorry if that's TMI, but like that was a huge thing before. Like I had to take baths. Um, I have no trouble getting dressed. I can, work out. Like, but there are certain things that I still like. I can't run that well or at all. I don't know. Um, and I can't, maybe like balance on one leg as easily as I could before. But I mean, from a practical level, yeah, I'm normal. I mean, I have a handicap pass because that I can put on my car because, um, it is a little bit hard to walk like really long distances, but I hardly ever even use it anymore because actually now like I enjoy walking and I think it helps. And I think it's just helpful for me to feel like as normal as possible. So, yeah, hopefully that answers like most of the questions I've been getting. But like, if you have any other questions, feel free to message me on Instagram at Steph, Steph, Oose, Oose, three O's, Stephoose at Steph Oose.